This week on Quadriga, the rise of populism, a threat to Europe. The far-right National Front emerged from a first round of regional elections as the strongest political force in France. Many are now asking if party leader Marine Le Pen could be the country's next president. And France isn't the only country in Europe where right-wing parties are gaining ground. At the top of the populist agenda, fear of migrants and fear of Islamist terror. The simple answer to complex challenges is more nationalism and less EU. That message clearly resonates with many voters. How great a threat to Europe do populist parties pose? Coming to you from Berlin, Quadriga, the international debate. Your host this week, Peter Craven.
Yes, hello and a very warm welcome indeed to this latest edition of Quadriga, coming to you from the heart of the German capital. And the question we're asking today is this: is the rise of populism, of right-wing populism, with France very much to the fore, a threat to Europe? And to try and answer that question, I'm joined here in the studio by three seasoned observers and analysts. Let me introduce them to you without any further ado, beginning with Ulrike Guerrot. She is a political analyst and founder and director of the European Democracy Lab. Now, Ulrike says the Front National is not a new phenomenon in France, and the recent terror attacks are not the real reason for its surge in popularity. Indeed, she says the Front National is a people's party that brings together the lost citizens of the Republic. We're also joined by Judy Dempsey, who is a writer and analyst for the Carnegie Foundation, who in a long and distinguished career in journalism has also worked for a host of international media outlets. And she says Marine Le Pen could well become the next president of France. Europe's future would then rest with her. And Ulrike Herrmann is an author and a journalist with the Berlin-based daily The Tageszeitung, all of Taz, as it's also known. She focuses on business and finance and believes that Germany's economic policies are partly to blame for the growing support for the Front National in France. Welcome to all of you. I'd like to begin with you, Judy, and I'd like to begin with a quote from a very interesting and courageous woman. I'm sure she is familiar to you, Beate Klaasfeld. Born here in Germany, born here in Berlin. She's in her 70s now. She's lived a lot of her life in France, and she's made a reputation for herself for hunting down former Nazi war criminals. What she has to say is important, and what she has said about recent developments in France is this: what we are seeing in France, she says, reminds me of the year 1933 in Germany. It's strong stuff. Is she right?
She's not right, but she could be right. And substituting Jews for Muslims, Muslims for Jews, it's becoming very, very worrying. We've seen this, what's happening to the United States. It must be quite shocking to be a Muslim. And now Muslims are being targeted in France, and the Front National is directed against Islam, against a religion. It's very worrying. One hopes that European leaders will not allow this slide into this self-destruction.
Ulrike Guerrot, what do you say? France today, like Germany in 1933, is that a valid comparison in any way?
Well, comparisons are always difficult, yeah? So let's stay it here. But I agree with Mrs. Dempsey that the problem is that we are losing the laïcité of La République, of the French Republic. Yeah?
Explain for us what that is.
It's basically that the state is neutral towards religion. This is what the French founded in 1905. And that is the laïcité, so the neutrality towards religion is a basic condition for the French Republic in the sense of modern republicanism. And this is indeed something which the Front National is deconstructing. I give one precise example. Marine Le Pen is probably not the real danger, but Marion Le Pen, her niece, 25 years old, she had said in the before the regional elections now, in a speech in Nîmes, she said that who is not dedicated to the kings of France does not belong to France. And this has a little spin, and the very interesting spin here is she refers to Marc Bloch, who's a French historian, by the way, historian killed by the Nazis in 1944. But what she does with this quote that she misuses is, who doesn't feel for the French kings is not French. And that is, you could say that this is a slippery route, because this is sort of a pre-step to pogrom, yeah? Because you say who belongs to a people and who not. And this has clearly an anti-Islam, anti-Muslim spin, and is basically the deconstruction of the French notion of republic, which integrates citizens. And so I would agree, it's very dangerous.
It's certainly a winning formula, because she's gaining in popularity, gaining more and more votes, the strongest force in French politics now. You said that you talked in the quote that I gave at the top of the show. You said there are lost citizens in France that are the people who are voting for the Front National. Who are these lost citizens?
I think the Front National is nourished by many sort of lost citizens. Yeah, and the lost citizens are. We thought in the past that the Front National is strong in the banlieues, where the French Communist Party was strong in the past. Yeah? And there is a clear shift from communist vote to Front National vote in the 80s already. So that's the first sort of lost people, which is the proletariat of modern industrialization deconstruction. Yeah. The second are obviously the farmers, which are also France is a very rural country, and then the agricultural policy of the European Union is also a very big problem. So that's the second group. The third group is young unemployed people. Yeah, the fourth, and so she is collecting all these people who feel lost in a sort of modernization process. And what we need to look at in sociological terms is there's a very strong rural-urban divide in France, something which we are not knowing in Germany that much, which is a much more homogeneous country. And it's the rural-urban divide which, to a large extent, is driving the force of the Front National, because the rural areas didn't survive, in a way, the very deep austerity policy which we have been doing in the European Union.
OK, I've got a picture now of where the Front National is coming from. Briefly, how dangerous is the Front National?
It is dangerous. I mean, we are talking now 30%, but that's average. If you look at more detailed sort of breakdown data, what we see is Marine Le Pen has many regions where she turns out 40 and plus. She has a couple of constituencies where she's above 50. The only thing which protects us from seeing this is that the French have a first past the first election system, majority voting system, and not proportional system. Yes. Had the French German proportional voting system, we would clearly see that the Front National is somewhere between SPD and CDU, which is largely Volkspartei, which is a people's party in that sense. And we are not seeing this, or in the other one, we are just protected to see this by the election law in France.
Ulrike Hamann, can you give us any sense of the extent to which the Front National is typical for far-right populist parties around Europe, and there are many to choose from, or atypical?
Well, it is very typical in the sense that it is against the EU. It is a very national party. It is typical in the sense that it's an in-group, out-group scheme. So there are the French, and then there are the foreigners or the Muslims or whoever who are not supposed to belong to the national group. Then it is very typical in the sense that it has a strong social component, in the sense that they want to raise the pensions, they want to raise the benefits for the unemployed, they want to spend more money on social security, but only for French, of course, not for the Muslims. So, and it is very typical also in the sense that they do not have a coherent program. It's just, mostly, it's just against being everything the establishment in Paris somehow stipulates. And I think a very specific idea they have, which really should the Germans alarm, is that Marine Le Pen says, well, we are against Germany because Germany tries to erect a German Europe. And I think that's new because, for example, the Dutch populists are not against Germany, or the Austrian populists, also very strong, are not against Germany. That's the first. That's the first public populist party in Europe that actively says Germany is the problem.
Just to pick.
Yeah,
it's interesting you say this. I mean, first of all, it's only the beginning for Marine Le Pen, and the beginning is not always lead to success. But the psychological impact so far gives the populist parties across Europe such a boost. You see, France can do it, and despite all the elites against her, and with the whole issue of the British referendum, whether to stay in or outside the EU, that's going to boost the anti-Europe party. The Poles, the new Polish government, the nationalist conservative government, which is very populist, they're riding high on this, and so are the Hungarians.
We're being very analytical here, being very rational in the approach to it, and I'm very grateful for that, because that is very much the backdrop. But this is a cause for extreme concern, especially around the future of Europe, surely.
It is. If it's not stopped, we will lose Europe. And the fact that Ulrike brought in this attacking Germany from France, it's the Franco-German axis that brought stability, brought the European Union, brought this kind of special integration of Europe. And if that goes, then the bedrock of this European architecture is gone. This is very, very serious.
Yeah, but sort of the Franco-German engine always functioned on the sort of similarity or the sort of symmetry of both countries. And this symmetry is broken since ever Germany got unified, because not only we gained enormously in economic power, this is the argument that basically the way of the German dominance in how to run the Eurozone or the Euro governance was seen in France. And that is what Mrs. Herrmann just said, that the French are reacting in the negative and say we do not want to be governed by a German sort of Euro governance feature here, and that fuels Marine Le Pen. So we were losing the Franco-German symmetry on that economic level, but we are losing it also on the political level, since ever then Merkel is basically the leader of Europe. You go to China, to the US, she speaks to Putin. So also Germany gained political power, and the asymmetry of the Franco-German tandem, which were the carrier of the old European Union, is no longer there. So there's a clear rupture in that engine function.
OK. One thing we can agree on when we talk about the far-right nationalist parties is that they tend to pander and play to the kind of fears that many, many people across Europe have in the globalised world. Judy's agreeing with me. We'll talk about it in just a second. Let's just, before we do that, let's just have a look at what those fears precisely are.
Many Europeans feel traditional parties have been ignoring their troubles, worries and concerns. Populists like those in the National Front profit from that, focusing on fear, such as the fundamental fear of allowing in too many migrants. In 2015, around 1 million refugees have fled to Germany alone. Then there's the fear of ghettos like those surrounding France's cities, and fear of the Islamist terror they might spawn. And not to forget the fear of Eurocrats in Brussels making all the decisions. Populist parties say they care more about the big multinationals than citizen rights. And last but not least, there's the fear of unemployment and poverty. That's why right-wing populist parties have also gained footholds in Europe's wealthier nations.
Judy Dempsey, are those fears real or justified?
Unemployment is not a pleasant situation to be in. And there's armies of young people without a perspective. And Germany is probably one of the fortunate countries, one or two others that don't have a high unemployment rate among the youth. But if the youth are waiting to be channeled or to be captured by populist parties, or indeed by ISIS, by the so-called Islamic state, and this is highly, highly dangerous. And leaders, the EU leaders have called summits on this, but actually it has to be much more radical, the approach to deal with unemployment. If you can't deal with the unemployment, you're not going to actually dampen the flames of this populist movement.
What do you say, ladies? Are those fears imaginary or justified? Because I do think it's a very important question.
One of your clips said that the populists are more against the big companies and care for citizens, right? And let me pick on this. We have seen this Juncker Lex affair in the European Parliament with this tax evasion stuff and their, you know, the Commission tax betrayment in Luxembourg, and Juncker was affected. It was the right-wing populist parties who brought in the proposal to do Untersuchungsausschuss, an investigation thing, yeah. And none of the other parties basically voted for that. So what do we see is that something which is right and normal to do, which we should have done, cannot be voted because the other parties are not signing with the populist parties. So we do have basically hollowed out policy mechanisms because we say these are populist parties, we cannot vote with them, but we don't do the right thing, which is to have that committee on Juncker-Lex. So there are dysfunctionalities in the systems because we exclude them, but it helps us not to, it prevents us from doing the right thing.
OK, a structural problem there, but I think there's more to it.
Well, yeah, I think that you just have to see that the unemployment rate in France is really very high compared to Germany, especially. And that is not just something that affects France or is due to French policies, but it's Germany exporting its unemployment to France. And the trick was that the Germans just pushed down their real wages in order to be more competitive. Yeah. And now France lost 20% of its competitiveness on the world markets and also in the euro area. So now the Germans sell their goods and we have enormous export surpluses, and the French, they lose out.
But the Front National existed a long time before Germany started dictating, if that's the word, budgetary probity to the French.
No, the German trick to push down the wages is 15 years old. And in fact, you can really see in the French figures that they started to get into trouble in 2004. So, and at the same time that the Germans pushed their goods on the French market and on the world market, you can see that the Front National rises according to unemployment in France.
Absolutely.
It's not only about people who are already unemployed. It's also about those people fearing to be perhaps unemployed. You know, it's just if you start to somehow erode the stability of a society, people start to react by
so you understand that fear, but people also have concerns. They say they vote for the Front National and other similar parties around Europe because they're challenged, let's put it like that, by changing patterns within their society.
Yeah. Can we,
I think you know what I mean.
Can we say something? We are talking about fears, but my point would be that, and that is why I put that committee into place, because much of the things that the populists are claiming for or requesting are real things. It's not about fears. They are right in their analysis.
They're often not taken seriously by the urban elite.
And no, the problem is, and this is what Mrs. Herman said, the system, the EU system, is not reacting to legitimate reproaches which are brought up by the populists. We say they are having fears. No, there is a reality behind, and we should take that reality for serious, because the system is dysfunctional, the system is producing social unrest and so on and so forth. And as long as the system just says, no, they are all driven by fears, we have a problem here, because in many points the so-called populists have a fair and right and legitimate point to point to.
OK. First of all, Ulrike, this idea of the illegitimacy in some ways of the EU institutions, it's been going on for a long, long time, and very little action has been taken. So there's the gap between the society and the people is much wider than ever before. That's the first thing. Secondly, this crisis, I agree with Ulrike, you have to engage. You can't push these populist parties off into rivers. They are there and they are reality, and you don't ape their policies, you have a dialogue. But I think there's something much more fundamental taking place across Europe. It's the decay of the post-1945 political system. The big parties, the status quo parties, they've run their course in many ways. The big bloc parties, they're sort of atrophied. They haven't embraced the younger generation. They've survived the 50s, 60s and 70s. But now we have a demand by a younger generation, but the demands of globalisation that need a kind of new political structures and new political parties to actually be inclusive.
It is sometimes said that the answer to the conundrum that you're talking about here is that the political parties, the traditional parties, that they adopt some of the policies of the populist parties and try and beat them at their own game.
Yeah, indeed.
Is that the way to go?
No,
Of course not. No.
No, I think what is happening is that we are having all these people's requests, in the sense of Rousseau, volonté de tous, the wishes of the people against what the system is providing. So this is Rousseau, volonté générale. So I think in analytical terms is we have a system in the EU which is so dysfunctional that it didn't provide public goods or volonté générale for enough people. We are losing out more and more people in the lower quintiles and to 25-30% of basically systemic losers in terms of unemployment or farmers and these people are now turning against the system.
Sure, but Martin Schulz, the President of the European Parliament, came out this week and said that the European Union is in danger from all these developments. Why doesn't the EU respond by finally getting its house in order?
Well, it can't. It can't.
It can't.
It can't for a very complex reason that's not easily to solve. The crisis of Europe is a crisis of self-confidence.
No. We could solve this.
We don't want to solve it. We don't want to solve it because we don't feel confident enough to actually engage and to actually describe what we stand for and how we're going to defend our societies.
I agree on this, but we have all the policy tools in the shelves, which are, we do a fiscal union, we do same taxation, we prevent the tax evasion stuff, we do social policies. I mean, all these sort of blueprints for what should have been done to get a decent Euro governance are out there since ever Jacques Delors in '89 said that a monetary union comes along with social union. We are fighting that game for 20 years. We never unfolded a true Euro governance which would basically correspond to a decent policy mix where you have obviously a fiscal union together with a monetary union. We just didn't do these things, and the system is now running out empty because we have these proposals in the shelves for years and years, and we have all the dysfunctionalities that we could never put them into place, and now we are paying the bill for this.
We have the European problem that you've just been talking about, the problem at the EU level, the Brussels problem. We have the economic problem that you've been talking about. We have the threat of terrorism, which is a very acute threat at this point in time. Where is all this going to lead? What's the worst case scenario?
Well, I think the worst case scenario would be that many countries in Europe adopt the Hungarian policy. I mean, if you look at what happened in Hungary and what is now being implemented in Poland, then what you see is a country that is, in a way, still a democracy, because every 4 years there are elections being held, and you can also say, OK, these elections are more or less fair. But in between these elections, the whole country is being changed. The media are controlled. The courts are somehow streamlined. They are no longer really independent. You can see that foreigners are being excluded, a strong national movement. And in a way, it's no longer a true democracy, and it is no longer able to somehow cooperate with other governments or states. So you'll have even if there is still a European Union called European Union, you will have lots of nationalistic states that somehow try to increase their own benefits.
Same Poland.
More nationalism here, but there are two things that could happen: more nationalism, less freedom.
What is interesting, you mentioned Marine Le Pen, or the niece saying you have to support the French kings. Well, you mentioned Hungary, Ulrike, and the famous slogan in 1956 by János Kádár: "He who is not against us is with us," or "he who's not with us is against us." And yet you have this extraordinary system or development in Poland and Hungary and in the Baltic states, but particularly Poland and Hungary. And how many of these young people have found work and a way of life in really strong democracies like Ireland and Britain, Spain, Portugal? And yet their leaders want to act as if turn their own countries into illiberal democracies and not take the benefits of Europe. So they want to close Europe, even though it's a open Europe that has given this younger generation a perspective.
But I mean, you can see that. I mean, I agree. This is somehow strange, but you can see that very well with Poland. Poland does not want to take any refugee, but you have 700,000 Polish working in Germany.
Exactly.
And 700,000 working in Britain. So, but the Polish find it completely normal that they are allowed to go anywhere, at the same time not taking in anybody. So that is, and you have the same with Hungary. But somehow, strangely, people do not realize that that is somehow strange. The same with Switzerland. There are lots of Swiss living in Germany, but they themselves don't want to take anyone.
I think there is the problem that, first, just that complex systems cannot solve crises when the crisis is there, yeah? And this is what we experience. The EU, in all respects, is a very complex system, but for complex system to fix it sort of quickly when the crisis is there is most of the time too late. And that's what we are experiencing, is the helplessness that we have a complex sort of system here, Euro governance, refugees, and so on and so forth. And the only reflex that that system can have is that we cluster it in national containers, and now the national answers is the good one. That's the reflex. But we are no longer having the capacity to overcome the functional the dysfunctionalities and the flaws of the European system.
We have 1 minute to go.
It's not as if we didn't have an asylum refugee policy on the shelves, which you mentioned. My great fear is that the Polish reluctance to take refugees, the Czechoslovaks, it's directed against Germany.
Yeah, I agree.
That's the great worrying thing, that Germany is becoming the scapegoat and the bogeyman throughout Europe.
I would agree.
Will Marine Le Pen become the next French president?
Hopefully not, but she could.
Could we see a repeat of the Front National here in Germany?
If a crisis hits, yes.
What's your worst-case scenario in one sentence?
Le Pen entering the Elysée.
OK, we're going to have to leave it there. I hope we've given you plenty of food for thought. Thanks very much for joining us. Bye-bye from now from Berlin. Tschüss.